Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. This is part of the Insights from the Field initiative at the Digital Data and Design Institute at Harvard University. My name is Antena. Today, our guest is Dr. Pinar Yildirim, who is an associate professor of marketing and economics at the Wharton School of Business. Professor Yildirim, I will give you the floor and take it from there.
Thank you, Antena, and thanks to Harvard's DCUB for allowing me to share some of our research findings. Thanks to everyone for joining. What I would like to do today is to talk to you about a recent research study that is focusing on the effects of robotization, effects of automation. And what we are looking at is we are going to focus on effects on the career value, the value of holding a particular occupation for individual workers, and how that changes as we increasingly go into a world with more and more robots. And I'll try to talk a little bit about how that potentially also influences individuals' choices, individuals' decisions in a number of different domains, including their political preferences. This is, I have to give credit to my co-authors, this is joint work with Maria Petrova from Barcelona, IPU GNB GSC, Gregor Schubert, who is an assistant professor at UCLA, as well as Bilady Tasca, who is currently at SkyHive, but formerly was the chief economist at Burning Glass Technologies. Now, I think for this audience, given that you're all here for a DCUB event, I don't have to perhaps emphasize how exponentially the growth of automation has been. What we are looking at right now is essentially from a report provided by the IFR, International Federation of Robotics, the annual installations of industrial robots. And as you can see, even throughout the COVID period, the growth of installation of robots have continued, reaching to over 500,000 in 2021, which actually represents an over 30% year-on-year growth in terms of the number of robots that are available. Now, of course, as we see more and more robots and automation in workplaces, we also start asking a number of different questions. What are the potential impacts of these technological shifts, these robotization shifts that we observe? What might be, for instance, the effects if you think about the interactions in the workplace? And if you think about the individual workers, what might potentially be the effects that these individuals might be sharing? I'm going to just actually hide the meeting controls for everyone. Hopefully that will help everyone to see a little better. And tell you what a workplace might look like these days, right? These pictures are not unusual, not uncommon. We see more and more workplaces that are fully driven by automation, by robotization. And we would like to ask this question of what exactly are the effects of automation and how we can think about the effects of automation if we think about the effects at the particular occupation level. Now, of course, there are many different types of effects of automation, and these happen along a number of different dimensions. We can think of the more immediate effects that automation might result in displacement of workers. It might result in changes in wages. Of course, automation might also change the task definition, right? What exactly a worker is supposed to do, what they're responsible of, and the delegation of these tasks. Who gets to do different tasks? It might change within organizations, the decision-making authority, right? Who is responsible for making decisions if you start seeing robotization, automation, AI? And there might be also effects that just not only influence a company, but the companies, other companies within the same industry. So there might be spillover effects to other firms, to other industries. And more importantly, I think a fairly under-discussed effect is also about the potential career trajectories that workers might have. The effects of automation may not only be short-term, but it might also be long-term. It may also impact the future career prospects that an individual might hold. Right? This might happen because you are hired for a job, and now with automation, the definition of the task changes. Now with automation, the potential demand for the task that you are carrying out changes. the outside options of employment changes for you, the wages that you have changes, which might change your bargaining power. So there might be a number of different ways through which the future, the career prospects of an individual might change due to automation. But we need to understand this a little better. We need to decompose this, understand exactly how and if these are happening. So that's the objective that we have in this research. We would like to understand how the career trajectories of workers are changing. I would like to understand if there are particular sectors that seem to be more prone to these changes, these effects due to robotization, if there are particular occupations, or if we see something that's a little broader than a particular single occupation, if we see potentially the effects of robotization influencing multiple different industries. And then can we say something about these effects? Can we say that these effects are going to have an influence on other decisions that an individual might make? I'm going to think about consumption decisions. I'm going to think about decisions such as education, investing into your education. And I'm going to think about investments that are more long-term, such as investing into housing and so on. So let's dive in a little further. What I plan to do within the next about 40 minutes or so, as much as time allows, is to talk about how we try to answer these questions, tell you a little bit about our empirical strategy, tell you how we think about measurement of a career value and robotic exposure. And I want to tell you a little bit about this relationship between robotization and career values. How does this relationship look like? Tell you a little bit also about the high-level descriptive changes that we observe when we look at career value changes for different occupations. Then I would like to go into understanding, again, the effect of the change in career values that are happening through robotization, automation, on a number of different decisions. And if time allows, I want to also talk about how these effects might potentially vary based on some heterogeneous dimensions like education. Okay. So I'll pause for a second to see if there are any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it into the chat window. Antene will help me to sort of screen them, and I'd be happy to answer them throughout, but we can also discuss them at the end of the presentation as well. So Antene, if you're seeing anything, please do feel free to stop me. Otherwise, I'll continue. Okay. All right, so let's think about that first part, right? How do we think about career values? How can we think about the potential value of holding a job? Because when you think about it, having a job is not just about the short-term effects, but it might also imply your future career trajectory that allows you to be able to earn different incomes from different jobs, right? Having a particular job might make it easier for you to move to different occupations, or may make it harder sometimes. So can we calculate in a single measure the potential value of holding a job? That's what we are going to define as a career value. And for this, I'm going to try to reduce the math and notations to a minimum. But for this, we are going to use a net present value formulation. What does that look like? We are going to think that if we have a career, that career might carry a stream of future income that might come from the particular occupation as well as some of the other occupations. Now, if we were to simply think about the expected value, what you're seeing on the right-hand side here, the expected value of holding an occupation, and if we could discount some of the future earnings with some value because they are only earnings that come in the future, and if we could sum them up, we could potentially derive a career value approximation. And if we can think about also the potential other occupations people might have, right? If I have an occupation O today, and if I move to an occupation P, if I think about the likelihood of me moving from one occupation to another and earning an occupation from that particular occupation that I moved to P, if I can also think about the potential of moving to these different occupations and add that to the potential of keeping my occupation and continuing to earn that occupation's wage, then I might be able to approximate my overall earnings potential, right, for a foreseeable future that a worker is going to be in the labor market. So If you want to be able to make such approximations for different occupations in a marketplace, what we essentially need is some understanding of how people move across different occupations, right? This pie, the probability of moving from one occupation to another, and do that for all occupations that we can potentially think of. At the same time, we need to understand what the wage streams of these occupations should look like, might look like, and combine them into one value. So that's essentially what we are doing here, what we are trying to do. And in order to get to this approximation, we need some wage data and we need some transitions, occupational transition data. How do we do that? We are going to do this through the help of Burning Glass, a company that does collect lots of labor market intelligence. What Burning Glass Technologies has provided to us was essentially about 16 million resumes of individuals from the United States whose job titles, occupations we can observe. And because we can observe it, and we can also observe when they start this occupation and when they end this occupation, and what other occupation they hold after holding a particular occupation, we can approximate the likelihood across all individuals of moving from one occupation to another. Right? We can observe, for example, if you're a nurse, what that you might move within 2 years to a management role. We can also observe if you're an assembly line worker, right? What's the likelihood that you will become a construction worker within another year? As you can imagine, trying to approximate some transitions like this using a data set that we have, about 178 million sequential worker year observations, that's going to suffer from a number of issues. We will have, for example, mostly white-collar jobs. We will have, of course, only a limited time period. We will go from 2000 to 2016 as our approximation period. And there might be, we will be confined with the details that the workers provide to us. But just allow me to say that we have done a number of checks, number of sanity checks, as well as number of assurances to make sure that this data, the data that we have, are going to be very, very, very useful in terms of approximating the overall transitions that individuals have, and will be still representative of the broad occupations that we observe in the economy. For the wage data, we are going to use official wage data that is going to come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Occupational Employment Statistics Survey. And this wage data, these wage data will allow us to see wages at the occupation and state level, and will help us to create these differentiation also based on the location of an occupation that you might have. So we are going to think of, again, transitions, and more specifically, when we think about transitions, we are going to focus on transitions that are a little more permanent in their nature. There might be these short-term jobs that people are holding. We're not going to focus on those. We are going to assume, or we are going to focus on jobs that people hold only for at least a 6-month period. Anything shorter than that will not go into our transition metrics. We will also think about the local prevalence of jobs when we try to approximate transitions, because it's possible that you are living in a region that has, for example, no mining jobs, or you might live in a region that has no healthcare jobs. That's unlikely, but you might still be in a region which has fewer number of certain occupations. We are going to weigh these transitions based on the local prevalence of the jobs to also account for the regional differences across the United States in terms of the likelihood of transition from one occupation to another. So when we do all of these things, right, we do all these derivations and calculations, and the very first thing we would like to understand is if we can understand at different occupational titles, and we standardize these occupational titles using the standard occupational classification that is provided by Bureau of Labor Statistics. The first question is, if you look at different occupations, how has the career values, how did the career values change over time for different occupations? And I am going to show you 2 different figures to sort of give a high-level descriptive sort of summary of how career values change. The first thing I'm going to show you right now is thinking about first the starting annual wages of different occupational groups, right? Farming, fishing, forestry, architecture, engineering, healthcare practitioners, technicals, and so on. If you think about the average annual wages that these occupations provided as a starting point, and on the y-axis, if we approximate, again, all the possible transitions that one might carry out based on the data that we have, from these occupations to other occupations. And if we think about all the wages that these occupations might be transitioning into, how does the career value changes look like between the period of 2000 to 2016 compared to the starting wage? And you can see that there's significant variation across the different occupations that we can see, occupational classes that we can see. In particular, on the one end, you see these legal occupations, right? They start at fairly high wages, but when you look at the expected career value changes, it's fairly low. In fact, it seems to be a general decline in terms of the career values. What does that mean? That might mean that either the wages that these occupations are earning is declining, or it might be that these occupations are now becoming less likely to move to other occupations that might be paying higher wages. So we haven't, of course, this picture doesn't allow us to decompose it yet, but as we go through our analysis, we'll be able to decompose into those two. Now, on the second sort of end, right, we see management. Management is doing well, fairly well. It's starting with high wages, and it continues to grow in its career value. And that might mean, again, that either the wages in management are growing, or it might mean that when you hold a management occupation, you're likely to move into other occupations that also fairly pay well. On another hand, we see farming, fishing, forestry. So this is an occupation that starts at fairly low wages, but it seems to have some opportunities to move into occupations that seem to be paying better. So again, there might be some movement in its wages or in its occupational transition. Now, if you look at this picture, and if you contrast this with just the changes that take place in the wages, right? Before I was showing a combination of movement across different occupations and the wages that those occupations that you transition into might earn. Now I'm only showing you the changes in the wages that take place between the period of 2000 to 2016 and the starting wages. Now you can see that just comparing these two, right, the figure becomes a lot flatter. And now we should be able to say a little more about what the source of potential change is for these occupational groups. Is it the wage? Is it the occupational transitions? Like if you, for example, look into legal, now it seems like the wage earnings seem to be a positive number. Now, it might imply then that even though for the legal occupations, there is a positive change in the legal occupation wages, the likelihood of moving to other occupations that pay fairly high wages or higher wages is declining for the legal occupation. So there's something that's going on with the legal occupations and occupational mobility from these particular jobs. If you look into management, on the other hand, it seems like management is preserving its wages, and presumably it's also preserving its occupational mobility to some extent. On the other hand, we were looking at before the farming, fishing, forestry. Seems like these jobs are not seeing a particular increase in the wages. So the previous picture where I was showing you, there's some career value growth. This must come mostly from movement or the occupational flexibility of movement, occupational mobility to other better paying jobs. So we can see, I mean, the point of this picture is to first show, of course, how different occupations seem to be experiencing different wage changes and different career value changes. But the takeaway is also, looking across these occupations, we see a substantial difference in terms of how their occupational mobility has changed and how their occupational mobility looks like. So taking this into account, the second thing that I want to show you is looking at, again, these transitions that we have calculated for different occupational groups. We are focusing again on the two-digit occupational classification by Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, I'm going to show you how transitions, again, the transition by occupational group. This is mobility out of an occupation. How do these numbers look like if you were to compare the transition probabilities, normalized transition probabilities for the period of 2000, 2005, and on the y-axis 2005, 2010, to the next 5 years, which is again 2000, 2005 comparison to 2010, 2015 comparison. If I just show you these two, you can instantly see that there seems to be a movement towards the right side of this 45-degree angle, which essentially implies that for, of course, varying by the occupational classification, but we are seeing overall a reduction in the occupational mobility across different occupations. Now, some of them seem to be suffering a little more, some of them seem to be a little less in terms of the movement. But we also notice that, again, there seems to be some changes in the occupational mobility that is taking place in these occupations. Now, the next thing that I want to think about is, well, if there is a difference or if there's some change in the career values that we observe, and we can see that there's something happening also with occupational mobility, some decline. Does that seem to correlate at all with technological change? So far, I don't have any causal claims, but the one thing that I would like to show you is using a computerization or automatability score that was actually calculated by two other researchers, Frey and Osborne, in their own study. In their study, these researchers looked at task definitions, the definitions of different occupations, and using a combination of different methods, decided or assigned a probability to each occupation in terms of how likely these occupations to become computerized, automated in the future. And we have, from using our data, we have calculated the career value changes of these occupations and just simply plotted their automatability score against our career value changes, again, for these 20 different occupational classification group. And you can see clearly that there's some negative correlation, right? The more automatable an occupational group seems to be, the lower was the change in the career value. The less was the career value growth. So this gives us some kind of a high-level potential signal that indeed there might be some relationship between what's going on in technological shift and what's going on in occupational mobility. Now, taking this evidence, and again, going back to this occupational mobility, I'd like to ask, is there something going on potentially about robotization, computerization, and occupational mobility? And one other thing I will show you here is now focusing on a particular occupational group, that's just the production jobs. How, if you had a production job or a particular occupation that's classified under production in 2004, how your movement to different occupations would look like in terms of probability. Here, the size of the bubble indicates a higher probability relative to other occupations within 2004 that we observe in our data. So you can see here that this big blue bubble, the management occupations were fairly highly likely for individuals to move into. Similarly, there was a sort of a like high transition, higher relative transition to perhaps transportation occupations, office and administrative, the purple bubble, and some movement to architecture and engineering and so on. Now in 2016, in contrast, the blue bubble, right, the transitions into management it seems like it's slightly lower. Office and administrative jobs are somewhat comparable, but other transitions such as architecture and engineering seem to have declined as well. So we are seeing also these, just focusing on the production occupations, which might be intensely impacted by robotization. A change in the structure of, if you will, a vertical movement, which typically is represented by transitions into management roles and transitions into again, architecture, engineering type jobs. So these are all descriptive evidence, of course, that tells us that something might be going on in this essentially 16-year period of of robotization, intense robotization that we observe, can we decompose this and can we establish a causal link between robotization that we observe in the field and the changes in career value? So that's going to be the next part of the analysis that I'm going to focus on. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the window, in the chat window. Otherwise, what I'm going to show you next is how we think about robotization, how we measure robotization, and how we try to link that to career values. Okay, so in this section of our analysis, what we would like to do is to think about some outcomes that might look like career value changes. Think about career value changes that happen within a region, within a particular local market. And on the right-hand side, think about the effect as automation, robotization. So we need to understand how an area, a region, or a particular industry is exposed to robotization. And we are going to follow a more or less, I think, standard way of thinking about robotization these days. This is going to be, for example, following Ajanoli and Restrepo, as well as a number of different papers from the literature. How does this literature think about robotization exposure of individuals? Here is a sort of a figure example that's trying to make it clear. So we use data, and we have data from, again, the International Federation of Robotics on the number of robotic installments, robot stocks that in a particular industry would have in a particular year, as well as a country. We have data for a number of different countries on how many robots have been installed and which industries these robots are related to. So, for example, we might observe that between 2000 and 2016, an industry, mining industry, food industry, has gained additional 4,000 robots. And then we might think about which industries in the United States, which regions in the United States would have a labor force that is actually within this industry. And then if, for example, in Pennsylvania, 50% of the workers happen to be in this particular industry, then we can say that this area might be a little more exposed perhaps to robotization compared to another region where the relative share of workers are fairly lower, right? So in California, let's say 10% of the workers were working in this industry. Then if we were only focusing on robotization that's coming from this industry, we could say that Pennsylvania is a region that's more exposed to automation compared to California. Now we can repeat this analysis for all the industries that we can think about, right? In another industry, there might be 6,000 robots that are added in this time frame, and the labor share of this particular industry might look different between California and Pennsylvania. Now, if we can aggregate across all these, and if we can aggregate, again, all these robot numbers and weigh them by the labor market share in different regions, in different commuting zones of the United States, then we can calculate for every region a robot exposure number, roughly. And this sort of expression gets at that we do a few other things to make sure that this measure is not endogenous to the local market characteristics, like using European adoption of robots as an instrument. And that's going to help us to again, understand in a more causal manner the effects of automation. Now, just quickly to show you how, once we start calculating the robot automation exposure numbers, how the change looks like from 2004 to 2016. This is the number of robots per 1,000 workers, again, taking into account the industries that exist in different regions. You can see that over this time period, there were as little as 0.2 per 1,000 worker robots that are introduced to as high as 9. And even if we take into account some local characteristics, you can see that more or less the areas that have been heavily impacted by robots are similar. The Rust Belt area, like the sort of middle regions, are a little more exposed compared to other areas. Now we are going to take this measure of robotics and we are going to plug that into that equation that I showed you earlier to understand if higher robot exposure implies a a change in the career value and the direction of that change and the magnitude of that change. Now, I am going to do this at this level. I'm going to focus on doing this for different regions. So in order to be able to understand the effects at the region level, I'm going to look at all the occupations that exist in a region, the labor market share, and then I'm going to multiply those shares with the career values that I calculate for those occupations to get an average occupational career value or average local market career value for a commuting zone. Then on the right-hand side, I'm going to have, again, this commuting zone level, region level automation exposure measure. And here I'm showing you the results from essentially this regression. We, in different rows, we look at different time frames in the corresponding columns, you can see the effects. And here, essentially, what we are showing you in sort of a quantified manner is first, regions that have seen a higher robot exposure indeed experienced a greater decline in the average local market career values. What does that mean? On average, the future occupational mobility, a combined measure of future occupational mobility and wages, that imply that those values were lower when a region was more exposed to automation across different industries. We can quantify this decline. So the value that we get is about, for one additional robot per 1,000 workers, we see a decline of about $3,000, $3,800, for instance, for the period of 2004 2008, about $2,000, $2,600 for the period of 2008 2016. If you just combine these two, roughly a $3,300 decline. And you can imagine, of course, that this amount is going to look very different for different occupations as well as different regions. So, but altogether, the higher the robotization, the lower seems to be the future earnings expectations across different occupations. Now, the thing is, of course, these changes, declines, might come from two different things. Right? It might be that as an area starts to become more exposed to robotization, maybe some jobs become less and less available, right? That's the compositional change. Might also be the case that even though all of those jobs are pretty much maintained, right? They don't go away. Their value, the likelihood of earnings potential and the occupational mobility of these occupations go down, right? That would be the changes in the career value of existing occupations. So we can create a decomposition based on these two possible changes. That's the math that corresponds to it. But on top of that, that second part, right, the changes in career values, we can also try to understand whether this is coming from the potential decline in wages or if it's coming from the changes in occupational mobility. So I'm going to do that in the next table. This is the map that corresponds to it. Let me show you how the whole thing looks like. So in the first two columns, I'm looking at, again, whether there's a change in the composition of occupations, or if the changes, the decline that we observe in career values comes from the reduced wage and occupational mobility of these occupations. And as you can see, that indeed the second effect is negative and significant. And that implies that we don't see necessarily jobs going away. We don't see a significant change on average in the composition of the jobs that are available in regions. But whatever job is available, or at least some of these jobs that are available, they seem to experience a change in either the wages or the occupational mobility. Now, in the second part, in columns 3 and 4, we are going to simply decompose that, right, to wage and PAT. And here we can also quantify to what extent, right, this decline is coming from the decline in wages or decline in occupational mobility. And here, what we see is about 1/3 of the effect is coming from reduced occupational mobility, 2/3 is coming from the wage decline. So even though fairly in just the 1/3, 2/3 terms, a higher share is coming from a wage decline, there is a significant change in the occupational mobility of these of these particular jobs, or the jobs in the regions that have been more exposed to robotization. So this is the important, I think, fact that we observe in the data that is fairly less discussed, right? So something, even if you keep your job, even if your job doesn't go away, your potential for the future is going to change. So oftentimes when we think about the effects of technology, we focus on displacement. We think that if a job is going to get you out of your job, if the job is going to be wiped away, we count that as a negative effect. But even if you keep your job, your future might look very different, keeping that particular job. And your ability to move to other occupations might look very different. And I think this is the important finding that we are documenting in our study. Now, just keeping time in mind, I want to show you a few other things, and I think after that we can leave about 10, 12 minutes for questions. Now, here in this figure, I was just decomposing these effects in different panels to regions that are high manufacturing or low manufacturing. And the contrast here is that in this middle region, you can see that most of the negative effects that we observe are actually coming from the highly manufacturing intensive regions. So these manufacturing intensive regions, of course, have been more exposed to robotization, and they are the source of the change, or they are the regions that are heavily the source of the change that we observe. Now, what's going on in terms of the transitions? Also, if we focus on these regions that have been more heavily exposed to automation, what is the likelihood if you have a job? How is that impacting, for instance, the robotization? How is it impacting your likelihood of moving to an equal wage occupation, a higher wage occupation, or a lower wage occupation? And you can see in these three columns, right? It seems like these horizontal transitions to jobs that pay similar wages is increasing if you're in a region that have been very heavily exposed to automation. Movement, the vertical movement, most likely, that movement into jobs that pay a higher wage is declining, and we don't observe a significant change in the lower wage occupations. If we decompose these, right, this is the equal wage transitions to equal wage occupations, transitions to higher wage, you will see again, one more time, that most of these effects are coming from the regions that are very manufacturing intensive. Another sort of quantification, or just the takeaway, the inside takeaway, is that what we observe looking at all the commuting zones and looking at the manufacturing intensive commuting zones, we see that people are now carrying out the transitions, the wage transitions that carry out tends to be more to equal wage occupations, reduce vertical mobility, more horizontal mobility if people move, and not necessarily reduction in the we don't observe an increase or a decline in movements to jobs that pay lower, but clearly this indicates altogether a reduced occupational mobility in terms of movement to better jobs. And two other slides, and then I can take a pause. What I am showing you here is whether the changes in the career values are actually coming from changes from one's own occupation or changes to other occupations that one individual might move to. And again, here you can see comparing wage changes, or the phi here is indicating again the probability of movement. You can see that the decline in career values are coming from both the declines in your own occupation as well as the declines that you observe in other occupations, but the magnitude is actually larger for the other occupations that you might potentially move into. So again, an indication of something important about the occupational mobility and the effects, the negative effects of reduction in occupational mobility. The last thing again, and I think after that we can take a pause, that I want to show you is what happens if, for example, you're in a region and in this region there's a lot of robotization. Are you, if you observe, conditional on observing a change, are you likely to change the occupation, the type of job that you have, or are you likely to change your firm and what are the likelihood of changing a firm, keeping your occupation, and keeping your firm and changing your occupation. So the last thing, within firm, keeping your firm, changing your occupation, we don't see a change here. But when we think about people who keep their occupation, we see an increase in changing firms. So if you are able to keep your job, it might mean that as an area becomes more robotized, you might have to move to a different firm. And column 2 also confirms that. And again, thinking about the likelihood of changing occupation as an area becomes more robotized, we see in column 1 a negative relationship, a negative effect that might again indicate a reduced mobility of being able to move to other jobs as an area becomes more robotized. So these are the main effects that we observe. I'm ready to show you a lot more results on this particular result. We can think of, for instance, how the high end of career values and the low end of career values, how that ratio compares or changes as an area becomes more robotized. We see essentially this ratio becoming higher. That indicates something about potential the distribution of career values in a region too, indicating unfortunately a negative impact on inequality, a greater inequality in terms of the earning potential of individuals. We are at about the 50-minute mark, so I'm going to stop here. I have a lot more to share, and if there are questions, I'd be happy to share. But let me pause here. See, Anthony, if we have any questions, if we have any comments, anything to take. Otherwise, I can summarize and tell a little bit about the other findings.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Yildirim, for the very informative presentation. We do have a little bit more time if you want to make a closing remark. There is one question that came through the chat. I can present that to you right now, if that would be convenient.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So the question is about how Gen AI is changing the occupational mobility analysis for knowledge workers. I understand that your research may not have addressed the impact of Gen AI technology, but I'm wondering if you can speak to from a more general perspective.
Sure. So there are two key differences between if you think about occupational mobility from an occupational mobility as well as a wage aspect, there are two differences between, I think, robotization that happens mostly in terms of repetitious tasks becoming carried out by a machine and software-oriented changes, automation that's taking place. One thing is, of course, the type of occupations that these different technologies are influencing. Again, robotization is a little more manufacturing heavy compared to AI. Of course, AI is part of manufacturing as well, but if you look at the industries, we will see more effects of AI in places like finance and sales and again, white collar jobs compared to the blue collar jobs where we see higher effects of automation. So the first thing that I would expect is again, the type of industry that these technologies are influencing. And of course, under the industry, we might observe different occupations being impacted. The second thing that it's going to potentially affect differently, we do see that robotization is impacting different educational categories. It's impacting both individuals below college as well as above college in a negative way, even though the effects are more pronounced for the individuals who are less educated. Now, we know that, of course, AI is a different set of skill that might become a substitute for the above college individuals. So I would think, I mean, even though I haven't studied, I would speculate that the effects that we might observe for, again, at a regional level for AI might be similar. It might show a negative effect in terms of career values, but I expect that the differences between less educated and the more educated will look different for robotization and AI, where AI might be potentially having negative impacts on some of the white-collar jobs, whereas robotization is more likely to impact the less skilled and the blue-collar jobs. Now, the other thing that, at least based on the literature, what we know so far, is AI is having some positive productivity effects on the companies that adopt it. And robotization also does the same thing. So there are some effects also for robotization that show that for the companies that are able to adopt robotization automation, there were positive productivity effects. But of course, that's only for those companies who can. And in a competitive environment, the companies who haven't been able to adapt and who are somehow left behind might be observing the negative effects of these technological changes. In our study, we show that on average, the effects for a region that is more automated seems to be, again, negative. There's going to be heterogeneity across firms. Surely there will be some heterogeneity across the occupations. And we can think probably similar effects will hold for generative AI. So that would be the high level. Let me continue for a few more minutes, and then after that, we can see if there are additional questions. Happy to answer other questions and take some comments as well. So one question, of course, that we might have is, are career value declines constrained to just manufacturing industries? I mentioned that manufacturing is heavily impacted by robotization, but does it mean that we only observe these career value declines in this particular industry or related industries? So to be able to answer that question, we have broken, again, these effects by occupations in manufacturing, retail, wholesale, services, management, other industries, and even further, right, textile, food, furniture, and so on. But the short takeaway from all of these sort of, congested figures is that the effects are not just decline. The negative effects are not just constrained to manufacturing jobs. We also see negative effects on occupations, for example, in retail, right? Retail and wholesale occupations also experience a career value decline. Services also experience a career value decline. And that becomes somewhat puzzling. Why would these industries observe these changes? Now, there could be a couple different explanations for that, right? It could be that maybe automation, the robots that we introduce, they are used in different industries at the same time, and similar effects are observed. That's less likely to be the case, where you might have this giant robot that you adapt to the automotive industry. Can it work the same way in a restaurant industry? Likely not, but that could be one possible explanation. It might be that as workers are getting displaced or they are offered lower wages in their own jobs, maybe they are looking for employment in other places and their bargaining power goes down. Maybe as a result, we also observe wages depressed in other industries. Or a third possible explanation is that as my earnings potential go down, I'm less likely to also spend money in retail or in services, and that seems to be a negative impact or source of a negative effect also on the earnings potential in other occupations. Now, we have tried to decompose into these three possible explanations, and I will say that shortly, we don't have a very clear-cut evidence of one or two. So we see, in fact, if you look at employment in other occupations, we see employment going down, for instance, in private jobs. We see in aggregate employment going down as there is more robot exposure. We also see wages, the hourly wages in services going down. We see again potentially all of the occupations on average seeing negative wages. Now, so even though you might experience, for example, expect the wages to be depressed, you might not necessarily expect employment to be depressed. And the two things happening at the same time suggest that maybe this is not just an effect of lower bargaining power. There might be other explanations. And one of the things we look at, for instance, to understand if there might be, for instance, changes in spending, we look at using Nielsen home scanner panel data. We look at household consumption, household spending in regions that have been more exposed to automation. using, and again, adjusting for inflation. And what we are seeing is that as an area becomes more exposed to automation, the household consumption numbers seem to go down. We also look at the businesses, local businesses that are created. That could be, for instance, your restaurant, that could be your hairdresser. We also look at whether there are fewer establishments, and if these establishments might actually employ fewer numbers of people. And we also see some negative effects on the non-tradable business establishments, which tend to be again, your local store, your restaurant, your hairdresser, and so on. Since we see these negative effects, we also think that the consumption effects, the reduced earnings potential from one industry, declining consumption in other industries might be, again, a force of the spillovers that we observe in other industries that are going above and beyond robotization. So we can ask this question, right? If we think that there can be career value declines on average that come from a couple industries, right, with generative AI, can we also observe the relationship, a similar negative effect on other industries? And I think the answer would be yes, because here what we are observing can easily replicate to generative AI. This is simply about depressing wages and earnings and spending potential of individuals, that having an negative effect on other industries. This could easily also replicate if we were to find a negative effect on the career values in regions that have been more exposed to AI. The last thing, since I have a few more minutes, I want to also convince you that these changes that we observe in the local market career values, right, these reduced earning potential, that actually seems to be a meaningful measure. If we can think of how automation, robotization, today AI, how these technologies change the future trajectory of earnings, can that potentially change my behavior today in a number of different ways? So for this, in our paper, we look at a number of different outcomes, but I'm going to show you a couple different things that we have found. First, we see that as robot exposure, automation is increasing in a region. In surveys, when you ask people how they think about the future of economy, they seem to be less likely to say that the economy has gotten better. Again, if we just think of these two answers, economy has gotten better and economy has gotten worse, even though these are asked separately as questions, if we think of these as complementary, this might mean that fewer people also think that the economy is actually going to improve in the future. So there seems to be some correlation between the perceptions about the economy that we hold and the robotization that we observe. Now, this seems to have some negative effects. If the career values, local market career values decline, we see less investment in education. We see less investment in housing, measured by housing permits. And we also see some differences in the voting patterns of individuals in terms of their support for different parties. To decompose that support, I'm going to show you another figure where we looked at the vote share of the Republican Party, right? Thinking about the fact that there are two parties, you can either vote Republican or Democratic, how the political behavior of individuals look differently in regions that were more exposed to automation, showing you different elections. And what you can take away from this table is that in regions that were more exposed to automation, we don't observe a change in the presidential elections in 2008 and 2016. The only change that we observed was actually for the 2016 election, where Donald Trump was the Republican candidate. Here, we observe that if we have one extra robot per 1,000 workers, there was a 0.4 percentage point increase in the vote share of the candidates, which also might indicate, again, potentially the changes that we observe in robotization, in earnings potential, how individuals might see their future, how they think about the economy, might have manifested itself in their political preferences for that particular year as well. Now, we stopped at 2016, 2017, because as we go further in time, there's COVID and there are other things that are happening Or time frame is focusing on that. Of course, these effects since the time period of our study might have become perhaps more minor, or it might have even become more significant. It's something that hopefully future studies can tell, but that's essentially what we see as well. And I mentioned this one heterogeneity, where we observe that even though looking at below college and above college educated individuals, they seem to be both negatively impacted by automation, the upward transitions for at least the more educated people seem to be less constrained compared to the less educated, where again, having some education seem to provide some advantage, some protection from the robotization effects. But aside from that, we also see negative effects even for the educated. So altogether, robotization, automation has resulted in a significant change. We can expect similar effects for AI on a number of different dimensions. On average, I would think that, again, there might be some negative effects that depress not just a single industry, but have effects on other industries. But we might also observe two different dimensions of difference. One is the industries and the occupations that are impacted directly, and the difference that one can observe between the white collar and the low collar jobs, or the more educated and the less educated individuals in the marketplace. The effects of AI will probably look different than the effects of automation. It might be a lot more targeted towards the white collar jobs and the more educated individuals, at least based on what we know from the literature so far. But robotization had dramatic impacts, and the effects were not just contained to manufacturing, and these effects seem to have reflected on the behaviors and investments and political choices of individuals. So therefore, they deserve a closer look. They deserve, I think, more investigation. With that, I thank you for the time. I'm right on time, and I'll pause here to see if there are one or two questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yildirim. Yes, we're almost out of time, but I would like to open the floor to our audience members if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask live.
And if you would like to reach out to me, here is my email as well. Happy to get your feedback and questions.
I don't suppose there are any questions,
Okay.
but thank you so much again to our audience members and to Dr. Yildirim for your time as well. I am very much looking forward to summarizing the insights that came up during this conversation and making them available on our website, LinkedIn, and other social media platforms so we can reach a much larger audience. But thank you so much. This has been a very useful conversation. And everyone, we look forward to having you again on other events that are coming up in the new year. But until then, happy holidays and thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio, for running this wonderfully. And thanks everyone for listening, and happy holidays.